Hi, eighth grade. So, yesterday we talked a little bit about the Louisiana Purchase and the transfer of land from Spain to Napoleon in France, and then Napoleon quickly selling it to the United States because he realized he couldn't defend it. So, what was life like in Louisiana after it was owned by the Americans? Well, this time period from 1800 to 1860, we call antebellum New Orleans. So, the antebellum period, and that literally means ante is before as a prefix, and then bellum means war. This comes from Latin. So it's before the war. And this period when Louisiana and New Orleans became American from 1803 up until 1860 was characterized by a few different things that we'll talk about in this video. Okay, so first of all, the main thing I want you to know is to think about the demographics. That basically means the population and who lived there. So I'll write this. The population that you need to know is that it was the highest population in the South. And this was because of the shipping market that they had and the slave market. And it was the largest slave port in the South. It had the highest population of free people of color. We'll talk about that in a second. And then a lot of German and Irish immigrants. The Germans, of course, we know went to the German coast, and then the Irish immigrants settled in the Irish Channel by the Lower Garden District. Just to give you some perspective, check this out. So by 1860, when the Civil War broke out, this was the population of New Orleans, 168,675. That's almost half as much as the people that live here today, which actually is pretty surprising. Like the number I thought would be much, much lower, but it's not that much. Compared to Charleston, which is almost 4 times as small as New Orleans. So New Orleans is a huge metropolitan area during this time period, bustling with activity, shipping, slavery, people from all over of all different kinds of ancestry. It's a huge gumbo melting pot of people. Okay, so one of the major populations we've talked a lot about is this Creole population. Another word for that is they're called in French the gens de couleur libre, which means the people, free people of color. Now, this is an extremely interesting population because nowhere else in the South, if you had African ancestry, were you treated with such respect and liberality as the gens de couleur libre. As you can see, this man is very well dressed. He is wealthy. And he could even have owned slaves on his own. And so he had mixed European African ancestry. And the people of New Orleans were pretty liberal about this class. It wasn't just black and white, but there was a whole nother class of people. We've seen that a little bit before, with the quadroon balls and the system of plaçage or plaçage. In which Creole women that were either octoroons, a quarter black, octoroons, an eighth black, or quadroons, a quarter black, would go to dances and marry or get into relationships with white planters and basically become like their side piece and live in New Orleans. And then the white planter would have his mistress up the river somewhere on the plantation. So this was a very interesting population that had a lot of power in New Orleans. All right, so if you live in a city with 168,000 people back in the 1800s, you had some major issues. One of them being disease. Yellow fever was a huge problem. Obviously, we know about the 20,000 soldiers from Napoleon who died from yellow fever in Haiti. Well, there was a huge epidemic in New Orleans in 1853, and it killed 8,000 people. So it kept sweeping the city and killing people. And immigrants, or people like the Germans and the Irish, were the ones dying off the most because they weren't immune to the disease. They weren't used to didn't have all of like the immunity against it, and they weren't used to the weather here, so they were bit by these yellow fever bugs and then developed the illness. Here's a picture of somebody experiencing yellow fever. I know this is gross, but the way that you can remember it is yellow fever means that you literally turn yellow, like your skin turns yellow and the sclera, the white part of your eye, turns yellow. And this condition is called jaundice. So that's why it's called yellow fever. Okay. So, what was the economy like in antebellum New Orleans? Well, we already know a little bit about the steamboat, which was able to transport goods up and down the river instead of just following the flow of the river. But really, there's only one thing you need to know about economy in antebellum New Orleans, is slavery. Cotton gin made slavery explode. And this sugar refining form of Southern slavery in New Orleans was particularly strong. Here is a picture of some slaves engaging in sugar refining. It was extremely difficult, grueling work for the slaves, and a lot of them died very, very soon. In Haiti, in particular, they only lived 3 years on average. So it was super grueling. Take a look at this map here. As you can see, up in the north of the South, they grew a lot of tobacco. And then cotton was really in this like Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia region. But then here, right on the Gulf Coast is where cotton was being grown, but mostly sugar. So sugar refining, the cotton gin, and the steamboat were 3 really, really important keys to the Louisiana and New Orleans economy. Okay, almost done with this video. Stick with me. Oops. Let's see if we can guess the answer to this question. So, before the Civil War, slavery expanded in the South rather than in the North because the Constitution contained a clause that outlawed the importation of slaves into northern states. Congress passed a law forbidding slavery in the North. Northern states passed affirmative action legislation. Or geographic conditions in the South encouraged the development of large plantations. Well, look at what's able to grow in the South. So yeah, the answer's D. The South was able to grow large plantations. There was tons of land, and the weather was right for growing these big cash crops. Ultimately, though, what I want you to know is in this antebellum or before the Civil War era, New Orleans was a thriving, cosmopolitan port city. All right, what I would like you to do is turn to the back of your packet where it says Teacher-Led Station. I wanted to preview this really quickly so that you get started. Today's exit ticket's slightly different than usual. I have 6 topics that were discussed from this video, plus the Louisiana Purchase. And select one of those topics to research, and then I want you to create a 3-slide presentation and share it with your social studies teacher. Make sure that you include visuals, key facts, and important dates. So go ahead and circle the topic that seems the most interesting to you, and then take notes here as you research on the internet. Don't forget to start making your Google Slides presentation and share it with your teacher. All right, have a great day. Hopefully you learned more about life in antebellum New Orleans.